The Mongol Empire did not rise through diplomacy, alliances, or subtlety. It was forged in the furnace of relentless warfare, a maelstrom of destruction that swept across vast continents. From the windswept steppes of Central Asia to the fertile plains of Europe and the sprawling cities of the Middle East, the Mongol war machine was a force unlike any before it, brutal, efficient, and terrifying. Their conquests were not merely acts of expansion, but carefully orchestrated campaigns of terror designed to break the spirit of entire peoples before a single arrow flew. At the heart of the Mongol strategy was psychological warfare, a calculated use of fear as a weapon more potent than any sword or bow. The Mongols understood that war was as much about the mind as the body. They cultivated a reputation for merciless slaughter and complete devastation, spreading stories of massacres and annihilations that echoed long before their armies appeared on the horizon. This reputation was no accident. It was a deliberate tactic meant to coerce enemy cities into surrendering without resistance, sparing themselves the horrors that awaited the defiant. Entire cities were often wiped from the map as a grim demonstration of Mongol power. Mass executions were not collateral damage, but messages carved into the landscape of conquered lands. Villages that dared to resist were burned to ashes, their inhabitants slaughtered indiscriminately. This was not mindless cruelty, but strategic terror, designed to leave no doubt about the fate of those who opposed Mongol rule. The Mongols made examples of the rebellious, ensuring that the mere mention of their name inspired panic and capitulation. Their battlefield tactics matched their psychological warfare in ruthlessness and cunning. The Mongols were masters of deception, employing feigned retreats to lure enemies into traps where their forces could be annihilated with devastating precision. Their cavalry, unmatched in speed and endurance, could outmaneuver slower armies, striking quickly and disappearing before the enemy could regroup. Coordinated attacks from multiple directions left foes confused and overwhelmed, unable to mount an effective defense against such fluid and disciplined forces. But the Mongol war machine was not just about destruction. It was also a pragmatic enterprise that absorbed and exploited the talents of conquered peoples. Skilled artisans, engineers, and soldiers were conscripted into the Mongol ranks, transforming the once nomadic hordes into a formidable, multifaceted military power. Siege engineers from Chinese and Persian territories, for example, allowed the Mongols to breach the walls of fortified cities that had once seemed impregnable. This incorporation of expertise did not soften Mongol brutality. It sharpened their ability to terrorize and conquer on an unprecedented scale. Underlying all these tactics was the Mongols' use of fear as an instrument of expansion. Their reputation for cruelty was a tool wielded with precision, ensuring that many enemies chose submission over destruction. The psychological dominance they achieved often meant that cities opened their gates without a fight, hoping to avoid the wholesale slaughter that had become synonymous with Mongol conquest. This strategy allowed the Mongols to extend their empire rapidly, as resistance became not only futile but fatal. The Mongol armies were a well-oiled machine of terror and efficiency, their campaigns marked by a cold, strategic logic that prioritized psychological impact as much as military victory. Their enemies faced a harrowing dilemma: resist and face annihilation, or surrender and endure subjugation. The Mongol conquests were not simply wars of territory. They were wars of will, battles fought in the minds of kings and commoners alike. The terror tactics employed by the Mongols were terrifyingly effective. Stories of entire populations slaughtered, cities razed, and survivors tortured spread like wildfire, creating a psychological landscape where fear itself became a weapon. This fear permeated every corner of the known world, from the steppes to the heart of Europe, undermining alliances and sapping the resolve of armies before they even met on the battlefield. Yet, this terror was not random or chaotic. It was a deliberate, disciplined strategy orchestrated by leaders like Genghis Khan and his successors who understood that the shock value of their brutality would ripple through enemy ranks, destabilizing them from within. Their use of mass executions and massacres was as much a message to future foes as it was punishment for current enemies. The Mongols wielded death like a hammer, smashing resistance and hammering home the futility of defiance. Even the most formidable cities, protected by walls and armies, often crumbled not just due to Mongol siege tactics, but because their inhabitants were paralyzed by dread. The Mongols exploited this fear, combining it with their unparalleled mobility and battlefield cunning to dismantle resistance piece by piece. Their feigned retreats, in particular, were a psychological gambit that preyed on enemy overconfidence, drawing out forces into vulnerable positions before striking with overwhelming force. The Mongol incorporation of conquered peoples was another layer of their strategic genius. They recognized that terror alone could not build an empire without administration and logistics. By conscripting local specialists, engineers who built siege engines, soldiers familiar with terrain and tactics, artisans who supported the army's needs, they enhanced their military capabilities while maintaining their fearsome reputation. This pragmatic use of human resources allowed the Mongols to sustain prolonged campaigns across diverse territories. This blending of terror and pragmatism created a paradoxical empire, one that was simultaneously a brutal conqueror and an efficient administrator. The Mongols' terror tactics ensured rapid conquest, but their ability to integrate and utilize the skills of their subjects allowed them to govern an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. The terror that preceded them made submission the rational choice for many, while their military innovation ensured that submission was enforced swiftly and decisively. The Mongol war machine was more than a collection of warriors. It was a psychological and logistical juggernaut that transformed the face of warfare. Their conquests reshaped the political landscape of Asia and Europe, leaving scars that would last for centuries. The terror they inspired was a calculated element of their strategy, one that made them feared far beyond the reach of their arrows and swords. In this way, the Mongols did not just conquer lands, they conquered minds. Their reputation for cruelty was a weapon as sharp as any blade, cutting through the morale of enemies and compelling submission through fear alone. This legacy of terror defines the Mongol Empire's rise, a stark reminder of how psychological warfare and ruthless efficiency can combine to build an empire on the bones of the conquered. The Mongol conquests left a trail of devastation so vast that entire regions struggled to recover for generations. Cities were reduced to rubble, populations decimated, and once thriving societies plunged into chaos. The scale of death and destruction was staggering. Estimates suggest tens of millions perished as the Mongol war machine swept across Asia and Europe. But the Mongols' use of terror extended beyond conquest. It became an instrument to consolidate control over the sprawling empire they had carved from the earth. Fear was not merely a tool of war, but a mechanism of governance. The Mongols understood that ruling an empire spanning thousands of miles, across wildly diverse peoples and cultures, required more than military might. They employed brutal suppression to quash rebellions and dissent, ensuring that any flicker of resistance was extinguished before it could ignite. Revolts were met with swift and merciless retribution. Entire villages that sympathized with rebels were annihilated, their destruction a warning to others who might contemplate defiance. This iron grip on power was maintained through a network of spies, informants, and military governors who enforced the Khan's will with ruthless efficiency. The Mongol rulers granted privileges and autonomy to local leaders only insofar as they upheld order and paid tribute. Those who faltered faced the full weight of Mongol wrath, often in the form of public executions and mass reprisals designed to instill terror in the hearts of the populace. The empire's cohesion was built on a foundation of fear, where compliance was secured less by loyalty than by the dread of annihilation. Yet, amid this landscape of violence and control, the Mongols paradoxically paved the way for unprecedented cultural and economic exchange. The Pax Mongolica, a peace enforced by the Mongol Empire, opened trade routes that connected east and west like never before. The Silk Road, once a perilous path fraught with bandits and rival factions, became a conduit for merchants, travelers, and ideas under Mongol protection. Goods flowed from China to Europe, including silk, spices, precious metals, and technologies that would shape the future of civilizations. Moreover, the empire became a melting pot where scholars, artisans, and diplomats from distant lands interacted. The Mongols, pragmatic as ever, patronized science, art, and religion, allowing diverse beliefs and practices to coexist within their realm. This paradox of brutality and tolerance allowed knowledge to spread across continents, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance and other cultural awakenings. The very terror that brought destruction also unwittingly fostered a fragile but significant era of connectivity. However, the Mongol legacy was a double-edged sword. Their terror tactics, while effective in the short term, sowed deep resentment among conquered peoples. The memory of massacres, forced relocations, and harsh governance fueled hatred that simmered beneath the surface. This resentment manifested in repeated uprisings and rebellions, which, though brutally suppressed, chipped away at the empire's stability over time. The Mongol rulers struggled to balance fear with the necessity of maintaining order, a tension that would eventually contribute to their decline. Internal divisions further weakened Mongol dominance. The vast empire was divided among the descendants of Genghis Khan, who often competed for power and resources. These fractious relationships fragmented the once unified Mongol authority into competing khanates, each pursuing its own interests. Assimilation into local cultures diluted the Mongol identity. In Persia, China, and Russia, Mongol rulers adopted the customs and religions of their subjects, gradually losing the martial cohesion that had propelled their rapid expansion. The changing political landscapes of the regions they controlled also hastened the empire's decline. Emerging powers, better adapted to local conditions and less reliant on terror, began to challenge Mongol supremacy. The rigidity of Mongol military tactics, once an advantage, became a liability in the face of innovative strategies and technologies developed by their adversaries. While the Mongols had mastered the art of war through fear and speed, they were less adept at evolving in a world that was rapidly changing. Despite the eventual erosion of their power, the Mongol legacy of terror endured in the collective memory of the peoples they conquered. The stories of cities razed, populations slaughtered, and empires humbled by the Mongol onslaught became cautionary tales passed down through generations. This legacy shaped the political and cultural landscapes of Eurasia for centuries, influencing how future empires understood the use of fear and violence in the pursuit of power. The Mongol conquests stand as a stark example of how psychological warfare and brutality can build an empire with terrifying speed. Their success was built on the calculated use of terror to break resistance and impose order. But this very reliance on fear also carried profound human costs and historical consequences. The empire they forged was one of paradox, simultaneously agents of destruction and facilitators of connection, rulers through terror and patrons of exchange. In the end, the Mongol experience reveals the fragile balance between power and fear, conquest and governance. Their terror tactics ensured rapid and vast expansion, but also planted the seeds of instability and decline. The legacy of the Mongols is a reminder that empires built on fear may rise swiftly, but their foundations are often as precarious as the terror they wield. The echoes of their brutality continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring impact of psychological warfare on human history.